He's been poisoned! It was her!
Seize her! Don't let her leave this room! She attacked him! Don't drink it! Stop her! Oh my God, he's been poisoned! You dare show your face here. Your kind has no place among us. You are nothing but a stain on this evening. Back to your station. You forget yourself.
Indeed, know your place.
Precisely, we are watching.
You need to learn something tonight, girl, Celeste Carrington said, her voice low and polished, sharp enough to cut skin. A woman like you is supposed to move quietly, carry trays, wipe fingerprints, and disappear before decent people have to smell the effort on you. But you keep standing there with those watchful eyes like a stray dog that wandered into a crystal showroom, forgetting it still belongs in the alley. Don't mistake my husband's silence for respect. Men like Daniel build empires. Women like me protect them. And women like you? She let her gaze travel over Alina's uniform with theatrical disgust. You are what gets scrubbed out when the room needs to look clean again. Alina Brooks, a 34-year-old black mother of two with steady eyes and a quiet spine, stood beside the service archway with a silver tray balanced against her palm. She worked in the Carrington mansion because groceries did not care about dignity, and school shoes did not wait for pride. At home, she had a good husband, a hard-working chef named Marcus, and two children who still believed their mother could solve anything. Here, beneath chandeliers the size of church bells, she was expected to be invisible. Celeste Carrington, 42, white, elegant, and socially untouchable, wore a silver gown that caught every light in the ballroom and gave it back like a weapon. On magazine covers, she looked charitable. In person, she looked precise, the kind of woman who could smile for a camera while ruining someone's life between breaths. I asked you a question, Celeste said. Yes, ma'am. That was all Alina gave her. But Celeste was not finished. Neither was the room. Near the fountain of white orchids and crystal, the chief steward, Graham Pike, turned with that stiff posture of a man who had spent years mistaking obedience for honor. 55, pale, severe, and trained to protect the household's hierarchy before its humanity, he stepped closer with open irritation. Mrs. Carrington shouldn't have to repeat herself, Graham said. When she speaks, you answer properly. Alina kept her voice level. I did answer. A soft laugh came from one of Celeste's charity friends, a blonde woman in diamonds who held her champagne glass like it was part of her anatomy. Goodness, she murmured, they do come with opinions now. The women around her smiled. Celeste took one elegant step nearer. You answer with your mouth, she said, but your face still argues. That is what your type never understands. Service is not just labor. It is posture. It is gratitude. It is knowing that being allowed into a house like this is the closest you will ever get to significance. The words landed hard, but Alina did not flinch. She had learned long ago that some people fed on reaction the way fire fed on air. Apologize, Graham said. For what? His jaw tightened. For your tone. Marcus had once told her that the cruelest people always demanded humility after they had already taken your dignity. Standing there under the chandeliers, with tuxedos and perfume and polished donors drifting through the ballroom, Alina felt every eye pushing her down. This was not correction. It was ritual. Celeste folded her arms. You should be thankful I haven't replaced you already. There are 10 women outside these gates who would scrub my floors with tears in their eyes just to stand where you are. Alina lowered her gaze. not in surrender, but in discipline. "I'm here to do my job, ma'am." "And that," Celeste said, smiling thinly, "is the first sensible thing you've said all evening." The gala moved around them in a glittering stream. Donors, trustees, executives, local cameras. A string quartet played beneath the staircase. Waiters crossed with champagne. Somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, laughter rolled out and broke against the marble like shallow water. Then Daniel, Carrington appeared. 45, white, lean, self-made, and once known for the kind of restless brilliance that built companies out of nothing, he looked wrong tonight. Too pale, too tired. His tuxedo fit, but his body seemed to hang inside it as if strength had been quietly taken from the seams. When he lifted a hand to greet a donor, his fingers trembled for half a second before he hid it. Alina noticed because she noticed everything. She also noticed the glass. A special preparation sat on a side tray, reserved for Daniel alone. A dark herbal tonic in cut crystal, touched by no one but the inner household line. Alina stepped near enough to lift the tray, and a faint scent rose beneath the citrus garnish. Her stomach tightened. The balance was off. Not obvious. Not enough for a room like this, but wrong. Celeste turned at once. "Don't touch that." Too fast, Alina thought. Daniel crossed towards them with a tired smile, meant for the donors watching him. "It's fine," he said, reaching for the glass. Alina's voice came out before permission did. "Sir, maybe you shouldn't." Every head nearby snapped toward her. Celeste's eyes sharpened. "Excuse me?" The room paused on a blade's edge. Daniel gave a weak laugh, took the glass, and drank. For one suspended moment, nothing happened. Then the color left his face. His shoulders locked. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered across the marble. A donor gasped. Someone shouted for a doctor. Daniel swayed once, reached for air, and dropped to one knee under the chandeliers while the music broke apart mid-note. Celeste moved instantly, all silken panic and perfect grief. "Daniel!" But even as she fell beside him, one hand pressed to his chest. She lifted her face toward the crowd, and toward Alina. "He was fine," she said, voice trembling with just enough shock. She was the last one near his drink. And suddenly every eye in the ballroom was no longer on the man collapsing. It was on the black maid standing over broken crystal. Alina did not move. She looked at Daniel, then at Celeste. And in that terrible, glittering silence, she knew two things with absolute certainty. This was no accident. And Celeste had been ready. A proverb from scripture flashed through her mind, quiet and steady against the roar in her chest. "Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves." Tonight, she would need both. What do you think Alina should have done in that moment? Spoken louder and risked immediate destruction, or stayed silent and watched for the truth? And when a whole house is trained to protect one lie, who dares become the first witness? By morning, the mansion will close ranks, the allies will step into place, and Alina will realize Daniel's collapse was only the beginning of a far more carefully arranged cruelty. By sunrise, the Carrington mansion no longer felt like a home. It felt like a throat tightening. The marble hallways were quieter than usual, but not with peace, with control. Doors that were usually left open were closed. Two members of the private security team stood near the east corridor pretending not to watch the staff. The kitchen moved in whispers. Even the flower arrangements in the front hall seemed too perfect, as if the entire house had already agreed to lie before breakfast. Alina stepped into the service pantry and felt it at once. Something had changed. Not the silver, not the trays, the people. Every glance broke away too quickly. Every sentence stopped when she came near. The younger maid at the coffee station nearly dropped a saucer when their eyes met. No one wanted to be seen speaking to her. No one wanted to be standing too close to the woman who had been visible at the wrong moment the night Daniel Carrington dropped to his knees in front of half the city's charitable elite. Graham was waiting by the inventory desk. "You're late," he said. She looked at the wall clock. "I'm 2 minutes early." "That is not the point." No, it never was. He slid a clipboard toward her. "New movement protocol. New access limits. You don't enter the west sitting room, the upper study hall, or the private wellness kitchen unless directly summoned." Alina read the page without touching it. "Since when?" "Since this household has a reason to be careful." There it was. Not an accusation yet. Worse. Suggestion. Suggestion let people fill in the ugliness themselves. She kept her face still. "Careful of what?" Graham's mouth hardened. "Of staff who forget their place during a medical event." Before she could answer, Celeste entered the pantry doorway in cream, silk, and pearls, as polished at 8 in the morning as if she had slept inside a magazine advertisement. Her grief from the night before had been folded away, pressed, smooth, and replaced with managerial serenity. "How is Mr. Carrington?" Alina asked. Celeste ignored the question. "I'm told you startled him before he collapsed." The lie came wrapped in calm. "I tried to warn him," Alina said. "Warn him from what?" Celeste asked softly. "His own drink? One you had no authority to inspect? I smelled something off." Celeste's expression did not change, but something cold moved behind her eyes. That is a very imaginative thing for a maid to say. Graham shifted beside the desk. "Mrs. Carrington has already had to answer enough difficult questions from donors. We won't add gossip from staff." Alina looked from one to the other. "I'm not gossiping." "No," Celeste said. "You're doing something much more dangerous. You're confusing proximity with importance." Silence settled over the pantry. Even the dishwashers in the next room seemed farther away. Celeste stepped closer. "My husband is exhausted. His doctors agree. Stress, overwork, lack of rest. But women like you always need drama to feel visible. A dropped glass becomes poison. A fainting spell becomes conspiracy. It's almost embarrassing." Alina held her ground. She wanted to ask why the private doctor had arrived so quickly. Why Daniel's personal drink had been so carefully protected. Why Celeste had looked at her before she looked at the broken glass. But instinct told her this was no longer a room for questions. It was a room for traps. Then she saw it. On the lower shelf beside the specialty tea tins sat a lacquered wooden box, usually kept in the private wellness kitchen upstairs. Daniel's name had been embossed in gold across the lid. It should not have been here, not after last night, not unless someone had moved it in a hurry. Celeste noticed her eyes flick toward it and stepped sideways almost imperceptibly, blocking the view. Too smooth, Alina thought. Far too smooth. "We're simplifying. Service routes," Celeste said. "From now on, anything prepared for Mr. Carrington goes through approved hands only." "Approved by who?" Alina asked. Celeste smiled. "By people whose instincts don't disturb a room." The words were meant to humiliate, but they gave Alina something better. Confirmation. If there was nothing to hide, the routes would not need changing overnight. A voice came from the hall. The family lawyer had arrived early. Alina heard his low murmur before she saw him pass the doorway, briefcase in hand, face tense, not sad. Business tense. Celeste turned her head toward the sound, and in that half-second, Graham spoke too quickly. The doctor said the paperwork should be aligned before the next appearance. The silence after that sentence was immediate and vicious. Graham froze. Celeste turned back slowly. Alina did not blink. "What paperwork?" she asked. No one answered. Celeste's voice dropped into ice. "Get back to work." Alina took the breakfast linens and turned for the door. She could feel their eyes on her back, measuring what she had heard, what she understood, and how dangerous she had become in one single morning. By the time she reached the corridor, her pulse was beating hard, but her mind was clearer than it had been all night. This was bigger than one collapse. Much bigger. Somewhere inside this shining house, something was already being prepared around Daniel's weakness. Something legal, something timed, something meant to lock before anyone could stop it. And now Alina knew the truth had a schedule. The mansion had a new rhythm now. Not louder. Tighter. Every tray that moved toward Daniel passed through fewer hands. Every conversation stopped when Alina entered. Every instruction came with the soft cruelty of people pretending order was innocence. By the third day after the gala, even the air in the private kitchen felt curated. Measured spices, labeled powders, imported teas, refrigerated broths arranged with medical precision. That was what made it evil. Not chaos. Design. Alina stood at the prep counter folding linen napkins, while one of the junior kitchen assistants carried in a sealed box from the upstairs wellness pantry. Graham took it personally, signed for it personally, opened it personally. He did not usually do that. Men like Graham preferred authority at a distance. Now he hovered over Daniel's intake like a guard dog over a grave. Inside the box sat 3 things: a dark tonic in a glass vial, a silver tin of supplement powder, and a ceramic flask of fortified broth. Celeste entered 5 minutes later. "You," she said, not looking at anyone else. Alina turned. "Bring the broth tray." She lifted it carefully and followed Celeste through the side corridor toward Daniel's private sitting room. The house was silent in that wing. Thick carpet, soft lamps, expensive paintings, the kind of quiet rich people mistook for peace. Daniel sat near the windows with a blanket over his legs and a file open in front of him. He looked at the pages, but his eyes seemed to slide over them without holding. When he reached for his pen, his hand paused halfway, as if the thought had been interrupted before it reached his fingers. Celeste's voice turned instantly warm. "You need nourishment before you try to work again." Daniel barely looked up. "I'm not hungry." "That hasn't stopped you from needing strength." Alina stepped forward and lowered the tray onto the side table. As she did, the smell rose again from the broth, faint, buried, beneath garlic and thyme, but still there, bitter metallic. Wrong. She kept her hands steady. Celeste noticed. Their eyes met for half a second. Then Celeste smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a woman who knew she could stab and still be called graceful. "You really must stop staring at things above your station," Celeste said lightly. "It gives people the impression you're thinking." Daniel's gaze lifted then, sluggish but present. He looked from Celeste to Alina, and for one quick moment something like embarrassment crossed his face. Alina lowered her eyes, not because Celeste deserved submission, but because Daniel did not need her pride turning into another scene. Celeste picked up the broth and placed it directly into Daniel's hands. "Drink." He obeyed slowly. Alina watched the first sip disappear, then the second. By the third, she saw it, the slight change around his eyes, the tiny lag in focus, the way his shoulders seemed to sink inward, as if someone had loosened the wiring inside him. Not stress, not exhaustion. Pattern. That afternoon, she began counting everything. What time the trays left the pantry, which items were carried warm and which were held cold, which days Daniel looked clearer before noon, and which days he seemed to disappear by mid-morning. She tracked it silently in her head, while polishing silver, changing flowers, folding towels, and clearing rooms no one noticed her entering. By evening, the shape of it had sharpened. Whenever Celeste personally supervised the restorative items, Daniel worsened within the hour. Whenever a meal came from the main kitchen without the wellness additions, he seemed less fogged, less shaky, more himself. That should have been enough to terrify her. Instead, it made her calm, because now there was structure, and structure meant truth could be cornered. But Celeste was already moving. Near sunset, Alina was called into the blue parlor alone. The room was all soft lamps and old money, a place designed to make cruelty sound civilized. Celeste stood near the fireplace with a crystal glass in one hand. Graham remained by the door, a witness, a seal. "I've been patient with you," Celeste said. Alina said nothing. "I tolerated the look on your face at the gala. I tolerated your theatrical concern in the pantry. I even tolerated your habit of observing things that do not belong to you." She took a small sip. But patience is not permission. Graham's eyes stayed fixed ahead. He looked uncomfortable, but not enough to be useful. Celeste set down the glass. "You have a husband, 2 little children, a modest life that survives because this house allows it to survive." Alina felt the words like cold fingers around her throat. "This is the only warning you'll receive," Celeste said. "Stay in your tasks. Stop watching my husband like you imagine yourself his guardian. Stop entertaining whatever ignorant little theory your mind has built. If you remain obedient, your life remains intact." And there it was. Not advice, a poison deal, silence in exchange for survival. Alina looked at her. "And if I don't?" Celeste's voice softened. That made it worse. "Then life becomes expensive." The room went still. For one dangerous second, rage surged hot in Alina's chest. Rage for Daniel, for her children, for every time a woman like Celeste mistook power for ownership over human breath. But she did not give it away. Instead, a verse her mother used to quote came to her with strange steadiness. "Woe unto them that call evil good, and good evil." Isaiah had spoken of moral corruption long before mansions learned to perfume it. Alina lowered her gaze and said, "I understand, ma'am." Celeste smiled, thinking she had won. But later that night, while clearing the private pantry, Alina found what Celeste had missed in her confidence. One tray log out of sequence, one broth entry rewritten, and one missing signature where Graham usually signed off on Daniel's intake. A small piece. Tiny. Not enough to save anyone. But enough to prove she was no longer imagining the shape of the dark. The house did not need to say her name anymore. It watched her. By the next morning, Alina could feel the pressure in the smallest things. The pantry door left half open, then closed when she neared. The sudden silence when she entered a corridor. The way Graham appeared too quickly whenever Daniel's meals were being prepared. Nothing in the mansion was accidental now. Every route had become a funnel. Every kindness had become a test. And worst of all, Daniel was slipping faster. Not dramatically. That would have drawn suspicion too soon. No, this was crueler than that. It was controlled. A little more confusion in the afternoon. A little less balance when he stood. Longer pauses between questions and answers. Fatigue that settled into him like wet cloth. Anyone looking casually would call it stress. Anyone living close enough to watch the rhythm would know better. Alina kept moving through her tasks, but her mind had already crossed a line. She was no longer asking whether Celeste was harming him. She was asking how close Celeste was to finishing whatever had been planned. That answer came from a room she was not meant to hear. She had been sent to deliver fresh linens to the upper guest hall when voices reached her through the half-closed door of Daniel's private study. She did not stop in the obvious way. She slowed, bent to adjust the folded stack in her arms, and listened through the quiet. The lawyer's voice came first, low, clipped, impatient. Cannot keep delaying the package. If his condition appears inconsistent, it complicates the narrative. Then the doctor. He needs to be seen as declining, not fluctuating. Alina felt every muscle in her body go still. Narrative, not treatment, not recovery. Narrative. Celeste answered them with controlled annoyance. Then keep him stable enough to appear present and weak enough to remain manageable. I'm not losing control because the housemaid has instincts. The lawyer spoke again. You shouldn't have let her stay after the gala. And replace her with whom? Celeste shot back. A stranger who might notice more? No. This one is frightened. She has children. Fear is cleaner than dismissal. Alina kept her breathing slow. Inside the room, paper shifted across a desk. The doctor lowered his voice, but not enough. Once this is submitted, his objections will sound like confusion. The lawyer added, and once the board accepts the supporting material, the rest becomes procedural. Procedural. That word slid under Alina's skin like ice. They were not just poisoning Daniel. They were building the paperwork to trap his voice inside his own weakness. Whatever he said later could be dismissed as illness. Whatever he wanted changed could be blocked. They were not waiting for him to die. They were preparing to erase him while he was still alive. A floorboard murmured beneath her weight. Inside the study, silence fell. Alina rose and kept walking before anyone could open the door and find meaning on her face. She reached the end of the corridor, turned the corner, and only then let air back into her lungs. By the time she returned downstairs, her hands were steady again. That was when she saw Daniel. He stood alone near the library entrance, one hand on the table as if he had forgotten why he'd stopped there. He was dressed for a meeting he did not seem fully aware of. His tie sat loose. His eyes were tired but not empty. For the first time in days, no one was beside him. Alina hesitated only a second before crossing toward him. Sir? He turned slowly, studying her face as if trying to place it against the blur around him. You're from downstairs? Yes, sir. He gave a faint, embarrassed smile. I know that sounded better in my head. That brief flicker, self-awareness, humor, shame, hit Alina harder than if he had broken down in front of her. It meant some part of him was still there, fighting through the fog. You should sit, she said gently. I'm tired of sitting. The words came sharper than he intended. And then he looked away, ashamed again. Alina noticed the water glass on the side table. Unfinished, untouched, no broth, no tonic, no wellness tray. His gaze was clearer. A small fact, a dangerous one. Would you like coffee? She asked. Daniel rubbed a hand over his mouth. I'd like one day without everyone watching whether I can hold a cup. The sentence hung between them, heavier than either of them expected. Then footsteps sounded from the hall. Celeste. Her expression changed the instant she saw them together. Not anger, worse. Calculation. There you are, she said brightly, crossing the room with the polished urgency of a woman rescuing a scene before it developed honesty. You shouldn't be standing alone. Daniel's mouth tightened. I was standing before you arrived. And now you can sit before you fall. She took his arm. He did, not resist, but Alina saw it, the smallest pull away before he gave in. A reflex, a human reflex. Celeste looked at Alina over Daniel's shoulder. Why are you here? I was passing through. No, Celeste said softly. You were lingering. Graham entered behind her, summoned by instinct or instruction. Celeste did not raise her voice. She did not need to. From now on, she said, Mr. Carrington is not to be approached unless directly called for service. No casual exchanges, no unnecessary presence, no confusion. Daniel frowned faintly. I'm still in the room, Celeste. She turned to him at once, smile restored. Of course you are, darling. That's exactly why we need to reduce strain. Alina said nothing. That was when she understood the shape of the trap around her. Every move she made could now be recast. Concern could become intrusion. Observation could become fixation. A question could become disrespect. And if she pushed too hard, Celeste would not only deny the truth, she would make Alina look like the threat. But even inside the trap, one thing had changed. Daniel had been clearer without the routine. Only for a moment, only enough to matter. As Celeste guided him away, he glanced back once, not with trust, not yet, but with uncertainty. And uncertainty, in a house built on control, was the first hairline crack in the glass. By the time the sun fell behind the east lawn, the Carrington mansion no longer felt like a workplace. It felt like a net. Alina could sense it in the way doors opened too quickly and closed too softly, in the way security appeared at the far end of a corridor and then pretended to be there for some other reason, in the way the junior staff stopped making eye contact altogether, as if her name itself had become contagious. Even the kitchen had changed. Drawers that used to stay half open were shut. Supply shelves were rearranged. Labels had been replaced. Small things, careful things. The kind of changes meant to erase familiar patterns and make a person doubt what they had already seen. But Alina had gone beyond doubt. Now she needed the missing link, not just suspicion. Not just the smell in the broth or Daniel's clearer moments when certain items were absent. She needed the chain between Celeste's control and the machinery being prepared around Daniel's decline. Something that could survive denial. She thought the steward might be that link. Graham Pike had started unraveling in tiny, ugly ways. His voice shook once when Celeste gave an order too coldly. He had stopped signing some of the tray logs in his usual exact hand. Twice, Alina had caught him staring at Daniel with the face of a man who had mistaken loyalty for duty too long and had finally begun to hate the reflection of himself inside it. So when she saw him alone near the lower records room that evening, she took the risk. Mr. Pike. He flinched before turning. That alone told her enough. What do you want? I want to know how long you've known. His face hardened instantly. Go back to your duties. You heard them in the study, Alina said. You've seen the trays changed. You know this isn't fatigue. For one breath, the mask dropped. Fear showed, raw and human. Then it vanished. "You are dangerously confused," Graham said, "and that confusion is about to cost you more than this job." He stepped aside and reached for the records room handle. Alina moved first, not touching him, just lowering her voice. "If he dies under this roof, no one down here will stay protected. Not you, not the doctor, not anyone." Something moved behind his eyes then. Not courage, calculation. For a second she thought she had reached him. Then footsteps sounded from the corridor behind her. Security. Too fast. Too precise. Alina turned and saw 2 guards approaching with the stiff calm of men who had been sent for a purpose. Graham did not look surprised. The betrayal hit without drama. He had fed her right back to them. "Mrs. Carrington wants the pantry inventory checked," one of the guards said. "At this hour?" Alina asked. "Now." Graham would not meet her eyes. She followed them because refusing would only hand Celeste a louder weapon. But every step through the lower corridor told her this was no inventory check. This was choreography. The pantry door was already open when they arrived. Celeste stood inside. So did the private doctor. And on the center counter sat a velvet-lined case, half open, containing several labeled vials and packets from Daniel's wellness line. The doctor looked grim. Celeste looked wounded. That was worse. "I didn't want to believe it," Celeste said softly. Alina stopped in the doorway. "Believe what?" Celeste turned with slow heartbreak arranged across her face. "That someone in this house had become obsessed enough to interfere with my husband's recovery." Alina felt the floor beneath the moment shift. No, not yet, not fully, but close. The doctor lifted one vial with gloved fingers. "This was found out of sequence." "Found where?" Alina asked. "In a storage basket assigned to service rotation," Celeste said. "Near items under your supervision." The lie was elegant because it was almost shapeless, not direct enough to fight cleanly, just enough to stain. "I never touched those," Alina said. Celeste's eyes glistened. "You were warned to keep boundaries." "I was warned to stay blind." Both guards straightened. The doctor frowned. Graham had gone pale by the doorway. Celeste stepped closer. "You've been watching Daniel. Watching me. Moving through rooms where you don't belong. Asking questions no servant asks unless she has begun inventing a role for herself." Alina's pulse hit hard, but her voice stayed level. "He gets worse whenever your private routine reaches him." Silence dropped like broken glass. One of the guards looked at the doctor. The doctor looked away first. Celeste recovered immediately. "There it is. Delusion wrapped in accusation." The door opened again. A house assistant entered, breathless, carrying a sealed envelope. "Mrs. Carrington, this was delivered downstairs, marked urgent." Celeste took it, opened it, and for the first time that night, something real crossed her face. Annoyance, not fear, not yet. Annoyance that the world had interrupted her timing. She folded the paper. "Leave us." The assistant vanished. Alina caught only one detail as Celeste lowered the page. Marcus's restaurant name at the top of a printed notice. Her blood went cold. Celeste saw that she had seen. "Your husband works very hard," she said quietly. "It would be tragic if regulatory trouble found him through no fault of his own." There it was. No more silk over the knife. Just the blade. Alina stared at her. "You'd threaten my children to protect this?" Celeste tilted her head. "Don't be dramatic. I'm protecting my family." The words were so rotten they almost made the room smell different. For the first time, Graham spoke, voice thin and strained. "Mrs. Carrington, perhaps this is enough for tonight." Celeste cut him off with one glance. "No," she said. "Tonight is exactly when people learn what walls they are not meant to touch." The security men were watching Alina now, as if waiting for the wrong movement. The doctor had retreated into silence. Graham looked sick. Not helpful. Sick. Alina understood then that the house was not only hiding the truth, it was preparing her, shaping her into the kind of woman rich people could point at later and say unstable, intrusive, dangerous. She thought of Marcus closing his kitchen at night, of her children asleep in their small rooms, of Daniel upstairs, weakening by design while everyone around him practiced concern like theater. And through the heat in her chest came a verse her mother had once spoken, when evil smiled too politely. "No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper." Not a promise of ease, a command to endure. Alina lifted her chin. "If you were innocent," she said to Celeste, "you wouldn't need to frame anyone." The room froze. Celeste's face changed. Not much, but enough. The grief mask slipped, and something ancient and ugly showed beneath it. Then she smiled again. "Get out of my sight," she said. Alina turned and walked. Not because she was safe, not because she had won, but because she had just seen the truth with perfect clarity. Celeste was no longer only protecting a secret. She was preparing a villain, and she had chosen Alina. The second gala began with more security, more diamonds, and less innocence. Nothing in the Carrington mansion was left to chance now. The guest list had been tightened. Service routes had been rewritten. Daniel's appearances were limited, curated, timed. Even the lighting in the ballroom seemed designed to flatter Celeste's image of tragic devotion. She moved through the room in pale gold silk, one hand lightly touching elbows, shoulders, sleeves, collecting sympathy the way other people collected signatures. Alina worked the edge of the room in silence. She had not slept much. Marcus had told her, in a low voice over the phone, that the inspection notice at the restaurant had turned out strangely vague, serious enough to frighten, empty enough to feel manufactured. He had tried to calm her. She had done the same for him. Neither of them had lied well. Now she watched the ballroom with the hard stillness of a woman who understood that one wrong move could bury her. But one right move, timed exactly right, could crack the whole performance open. She was not here to argue with Celeste. She was here to interrupt a pattern. Daniel appeared late. The room shifted the moment he entered. Conversations softened. Heads turned. He looked thinner than before, dressed flawlessly and wearing weakness like someone else's tailoring. Celeste stayed near enough to steady him without seeming to hold him up. The doctor hovered at a social distance. The lawyer moved through clusters of trustees, planting calm explanations before any questions were asked. That was the tell. Prepared people always spoke too early. Alina kept her eyes on the tray line. Daniel's private service would pass through the east staging table before reaching him. Dark tonic. Supplement powder folded into warm broth. Exactly as before. Exactly as always. Except tonight, for one brief minute, the line broke. A donor stopped a waiter to ask about the Carrington Education Fund. Graham stepped in to redirect the wrong tray. A glass shattered near the terrace doors. 3 tiny disruptions, all human, all ordinary, except Alina had nudged each one into place. Just enough. By the time Daniel's service reached him, one element of the routine had been delayed. Not removed. Delayed. It was a small risk, small enough to deny, large enough to matter. Daniel took the broth first, then water. Then he stood listening to a board member speak about legacy and transition and the sacred responsibility of stewardship. The kind of speech rich men gave one another when they wanted power to sound moral. Alina watched. 30 seconds. 40. A minute. Then Daniel lifted his head. Not dramatically. Not like a miracle. Worse for Celeste, he became ordinary. Present. The board member made a joke about retirement. Daniel blinked, frowned, and said with clear irritation, "I'm not retiring." The man gave an awkward laugh. Celeste's smile tightened. Someone nearby said, "You sound stronger. Tonight." Daniel turned, and for the first time in days, his answer came without drag or fog. "Because I am stronger tonight." The room changed, not fully, not enough to save anyone yet, but doubt moved through it like a current under polished floors. One trustee looked at the doctor. The doctor adjusted his cuff too quickly. The lawyer stepped forward with a reassuring laugh and began speaking before Daniel had finished breathing. "Good night. Better energy," he said. "That's all this is?" Daniel looked at him strangely. "Did I ask you?" That landed harder than a shout. Graham, standing near the service archway, missed a beat. A waiter froze. Celeste touched Daniel's arm, and he pulled it back. Not violently, just enough for several people to notice. That was the crack, and once it appeared, the room could not unsee it. Alina felt it ripple outward. The trustees were watching now, noticing, recalculating. Celeste could feel it too. Her eyes found Alina across the ballroom, and in them Alina saw something she had not seen before. Alarm. For one electric moment, it seemed the lie might actually lose altitude in public. Then Celeste moved, not toward Alina, toward the microphone. The room quieted as naturally as a church when a widow begins to speak. Celeste's voice trembled just enough. "I had not planned to say anything tonight, but recent events have made silence irresponsible." Every instinct in Alina's body went cold. The lawyer stepped back, letting her take the center. The doctor folded his hands. Graham went still in a way that looked too much like dread. Celeste lifted a slim folder. "I have tried," she said, "to protect my husband's dignity through a difficult medical season. But there has been interference inside this house, repeated interference." Murmurs spread. "No, not here. Not like this." Celeste opened the folder and withdrew printed pages, security logs, pantry access reports, photographs of service carts, grainy still image from a corridor camera showing Alina near the private pantry on a night she should not have been there. Real things. Twisted things. Things arranged to form a shape. "We discovered unusual handling around Daniel's recovery line," Celeste said, voice breaking with crafted pain. "At first I hoped it was confusion, compassion overstepping, but now I fear someone has been trying to manipulate his care, and tonight's sudden changes only confirm it." Heads turned toward Alina. The trustees who had just looked uncertain now looked guarded. The donor who had smiled at Daniel's clarity now seemed embarrassed for having noticed it. The board member stepped away, as if proximity itself could become a stain. Daniel frowned. "What is this?" Celeste turned to him with tears brightening her eyes. "Protection." "It doesn't look like protection." But his words no longer carried the same clean edge. The missing piece had not been removed completely. The full rest of the regiment had already reached him. Alina watched the fog begin creeping back in around his concentration even as he stood there fighting it. That was the cruelty of it. A glimpse of truth. Then the hand over its mouth. Security began moving before anyone gave an obvious order, not rushing, closing. The ballroom shrank around her. Celeste lowered the folder and looked straight at Alina with sorrow so elegant it made the lie harder to attack. "I welcomed her into this home," she said softly, "and this is how she repaid us." The silence that followed was not confusion anymore. It was judgment. Alina stood in the center of it, every eye on her, every prepared lie now dressed as evidence. For one breathless second, she had cracked the performance. Now she understood the real design. Celeste had prepared not only a defense, she had prepared a public execution. And Daniel, swaying slightly beneath the chandeliers, was no longer looking at Alina with uncertainty. He was looking at her as if he no longer knew what to believe. The ballroom did not erupt. That would have been easier. It tightened. Judgment moved more quietly than panic ever could. It slid through the chandeliers, through the diamonds, through the silk and polished shoes, settling over Alina like a sentence the room had been waiting to pronounce. Security had not touched her yet, but they did not need to. The distance between people was already doing the work. Donors stepped back. Trustees lowered their eyes. Even the staff near the service archway looked away, as if seeing her too clearly might stain them too. Celeste remained at the center of it all, white and luminous beneath the lights, one hand still holding the folder that had just cut Alina open in public. For a moment, Daniel said nothing. He stood there fighting through the haze moving back over him, trying to hold on to the sharpness that had surfaced only minutes before. His confusion made the lie stronger. That was the genius of what Celeste had built. Not just poison, not just paperwork. A whole architecture designed to make truth look unstable at the exact moment it tried to speak. Alina understood that if she moved too fast now, she would finish herself. So she did the one thing Celeste had not prepared for. She went still. "Mr. Carrington," she said, her voice low but steady enough to carry. "Before anyone removes me, ask your steward one question." Celeste's head turned slightly, just slightly, but Alina saw it. Graham Pike stood near the edge of the ballroom, pale as linen left too long in rain. His collar looked tighter than it had an hour earlier. His hands were locked together in front of him so hard the knuckles had gone white. Celeste spoke first. "This is not the time for desperate theater." "No," Alina said, eyes still on Daniel. "It's the time for one honest answer." Daniel blinked toward Graham. "Answer what?" Alina did not look away. "Ask him who changed the tray route after the first gala." The room shifted. Small shift, but enough. Celeste's voice sharpened. "Graham." It sounded like a warning disguised as a name. Graham swallowed. He looked at Daniel, then at Celeste, then at the security officers. It was the look of a man finally understanding that loyalty had never made him safe, only useful, and useful people were always the first ones abandoned when truth began to leak. "Answer him," Alina said quietly. Celeste moved toward Graham, all velvet urgency. "You do not need to indulge this." That was the mistake. She moved too quickly. Daniel saw it. So did the trustees. Graham broke first. "You did," he said. The words were barely above a breath, but in that room they landed like a dropped blade. Celeste stopped. The silence after it felt alive. Daniel stared at him. What? Graham's face had gone gray. Mrs. Carrington ordered the tray routes changed after the first gala. She ordered the wellness pantry restricted. She ordered certain logs rewritten. His eyes flickered to the floor. And she told me if anyone asked, I was to say the doctor required simplification. Murmurs burst at last, low and dangerous. Celeste laughed once, disbelieving and bright. He is frightened and confused. But Graham was past protecting her now. Fear had tipped into self-preservation. No, he said louder this time. I was frightened before. I'm clear now. The lawyer stepped in immediately. This man is under pressure. Graham turned on him with a desperation so sudden it almost looked like courage. You told her the file would hold if Mr. Carrington appeared inconsistent in public. You said once the board had enough supporting material, his objections could be explained away. Daniel's face changed. Not because he fully understood every word, because he recognized enough. Celeste took another step forward, and now the room could see it. Something frantic under her poise, something animal clawing beneath the silk. This is absurd, she said. He's trying to save himself. Yes, Alina said, because he realized you were preparing him to be next. That hit Graham harder than anything else. He looked at her with horror, because he knew it was true. The doctor tried to leave the circle of attention, but one of the trustees turned toward him at exactly the wrong time. Doctor? The trustee said sharply. Did you support a capacity file while this man was being medicated under household control? The doctor opened his mouth, closed it. That was answer enough. The lawyer started talking again. Process, misunderstanding, stress, temporary confusion. But his voice was losing shape in the room. It no longer sounded like authority. It sounded like insulation catching fire. Alina reached into the pocket sewn inside her service skirt and removed the folded page she had taken from the private pantry log the night Celeste tried to buy her silence. I only had a piece, she said. Not enough to save myself, not enough to save him, but enough to prove the sequence changed when no one was supposed to notice. She handed it not to Daniel, but to one of the senior trustees. A dangerous choice, a smart one, because truth needed the right witness now. The trustee unfolded it, compared the overwritten entry to the pages in Celeste's folder, and his expression hardened into something far worse than shock. Recognition. There are alterations here, he said. Then Daniel spoke, and this time the effort in his voice only made the words more powerful. My will. The room turned. He looked at the lawyer, not Celeste. You told me we were delaying revision because I needed rest. The lawyer did not answer. Daniel's mouth tightened. You were delaying because you needed me weaker. That was the final lock clicking open. Celeste's beautiful story had depended on one thing above all. That Daniel's confusion would keep him from ever drawing a straight line through her motives. But now the line was visible to everyone. The poisoning, the control, the paperwork, the delay, the marriage as camouflage, the lawyer as co-conspirator, the doctor as seal, Graham as enforcer waiting to become the sacrifice. And suddenly the pack was not a shield anymore. It was evidence. Celeste looked around the ballroom and saw it happen in real time. Sympathy leaving, calculation replacing it. The elite world she had fed for years withdrawing its warmth, one careful inch at a time. No, she said, and the word came out too raw to belong to her public voice. You don't understand what she's doing. Alina looked at her then, fully. For the first time all night, she let the truth stand in her eyes without lowering them. A verse rose in her spirit, steady as breath. For there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither hid that shall not be known. Not revenge? Revelation. That was what this was. Security no longer faced Alina. They faced the room. And somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, deeper inside the house that had hidden so much for so long, a new sound began to spread. Not music, not gossip, not performance. Consequences entering. The house did not recover that night. It split. Not with shouting at first, but with distance. The donors who had spent years praising Celeste's poise began stepping away from her as if scandal could stain silk. Trustees stopped whispering and started making calls. One board member asked security to lock down the study and the private wellness pantry. Another requested every intake record, every altered log, every medical authorization tied to Daniel's recent decline. The performance was over. Procedure, the very weapon Celeste had used against Daniel and Alina, had turned and closed around her. Celeste tried once more. She lifted her chin, gathered the last of her public grace, and said this was all a misunderstanding, inflated by a frightened employee and a compromised steward. But her voice no longer held the room. Too much had surfaced. The lawyer would not meet anyone's eyes. The doctor looked like a man already calculating what he could deny. Graham Pike had stopped, standing like an enforcer, and started looking like a witness waiting to be processed. Daniel remained seated beneath the chandeliers, weak but unmistakably present now that the ritual around his body had been interrupted. When one trustee knelt beside him and asked quietly whether he wanted the event ended, Daniel answered with more clarity than Celeste could survive. "Yes," he said, "and I want every controlled item removed from my rooms. Tonight." That single instruction broke what remained of her power. By morning, outside counsel had entered the estate. The lawyer was suspended from every matter involving Daniel's personal affairs. The doctor's records were seized for review. The board initiated emergency protections around Daniel's voting rights and control status. What Celeste had called care was now being examined as manipulation. What she had framed as concern was being treated as strategy. Weeks later, the consequences widened. A settlement agreement was reached, but it did not bury the truth. It formalized protection for Daniel's restored authority, financial penalties tied to the conspiracy, and long-term oversight around the household and corporate channels that had enabled the abuse. The board issued an executive apology to Daniel for failing to detect the manipulation sooner, and another to Alina Brooks for allowing class prejudice and institutional cowardice to make her an easy target. Public statements spoke about ethics, review, and reform, but privately everyone knew the real wound was deeper. This had exposed a rot money alone could not clean. The company's crisis team tried to call it reputation management. Daniel rejected that language the moment he was strong enough to speak for himself. "This is not image repair," he said. "This is brand accountability. If a system protects polished cruelty over truth, then the system is sick too." And so the repairs began. Independent medical oversight, protected reporting, channels for domestic and corporate staff, dual control protocols for personal care administration, board review over incapacity procedures, quiet, unglamorous reforms, the kind that actually protect people later. As for Alina, Daniel cleared her name publicly and privately. He offered money, security, and a position if she wished to stay. She accepted only what gave her family peace. She did not leave the Carrington estate as a servant who had gotten lucky. She left as the woman who had seen what everyone else had been trained not to see. When she stepped out through the front gates, the morning light was plain and clean. No chandeliers, no cameras, no marble performance, just air. And the knowledge that one disciplined woman had broken a beautiful lie wide open. Alina's strength was not loud, and that is what made it powerful. She did not win because she had status, money, or immediate protection. She won because she stayed steady inside humiliation, kept watching when others looked away, and refused to trade truth for safety. Celeste, by contrast, was not dangerous only because she was cruel. She was dangerous because she wrapped cruelty in elegance, procedure, and social legitimacy. That is how evil often survives in everyday life. Not always through chaos, but through polish, influence, and silence. Through this story, I want us to reflect on how often people are judged by class, color, accent, or position before the truth is ever heard. I hope it inspires us to become more alert, more compassionate, and more courageous in the face of hidden injustice, so our families, communities, and workplaces can become healthier, safer, and happier. In daily life, we may not stand in mansions or charity galas, but we all face moments when silence feels cheaper than truth. God reminds us that what is hidden will one day be revealed, and that wisdom, patience, and courage still matter. If this story moved you, subscribe for more Black resilience stories that honor dignity, faith, endurance, and truth.